All right, everyone, welcome to the Bugyan podcast. In this podcast, as everyone already knows, we talk to InfoSec leaders, founders, learn from their experiences and understand how they can actually be implemented in our own lives as well. Today, we have with us Vivek Ramachandran, who is, of course, a veteran in the entire InfoSec space. He is the founder of SquareX, which is a company doing something very interesting in the consumer security, if I can call it, space. They've recently raised a very large round of capital from Sequoia Capital. Previously, Vivek was a part of Pentest Academy, from where I think he's built a very supreme following among the community, which was also acquired by INE in 2021. Um, he has also, found a couple of zero-day attacks, a lot of CVEs. He specializes in Wi-Fi security and has spoken at all kinds of conferences, from your Black Hats to your DEF CONs. And personally, Vivek, I unfortunately never had the opportunity to learn cybersecurity when you were around, right? I was through that OSCP kind of phase, but I have heard from numerous people, right? When we went to the US, did that talk that okay, you did it with Vivek, I learned cybersecurity from him. So that kind of a thing is for sure there. So thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dhruv. Really excited to be on the podcast and starts to kind of make me feel that I'm getting older when I feel like, I was like a teacher in an era before you started learning. But yeah, time flies, time catches up with everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, no, but you've managed to keep up with it with all the interesting work that you're doing in all kinds of spaces. So, Vivek, before we get into that, I would love to, kick off with understanding a bit about how you actually got into cybersecurity, right? Because as we all know, the journey into cybersecurity is a very different journey for everyone.
Yeah.
There is no degree for cybersecurity. I think in from where we're from, of course, there isn't much, and really a lot that people learn is learning through experience, learning through their peer group, and so on. Some people are, developers before and then get into security. Some people are, sales and then they suddenly get into security. What was your story? How did you get into it? How did you go from, building products to breaking? Would love to know the story behind that.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, like because of the fact that, as I said, like I'm of course older. So my story starts literally at a time when, internet was new to India. Think about it,
Mhm.
right? So I think I got my first computer somewhere around 1996, 1997. I was probably somewhere around 17, 18 years old at that time. I was just preparing for engineering exams, just like probably a lot of people do. And that was the time when primarily on the internet, you probably didn't have like very organized content, right? Like, so I was actually using it to look at, physics questions for IIT entrance and
Okay.
going to university websites. And those were, by the way, the time when there was no e-learning platforms that is today.
Mhm.
So we used to just go out and just see, if there's something interesting that I could learn, which would help in my engineering entrance exam preparations. Most, I would say, outfits didn't even have websites. Think about it, right? Rediff was the most popular website, if I remember, in India
Right,
at that time.
right.
It's probably
My
not
dad
even
had a
this.
Rediff mail account, and I don't remember it
Yeah.
when using
Yeah, so think about it, right? So anyway, at that time, I used to read news online because that was a better way of keeping in touch with what's happening globally, instead of relying on local newspapers. And at that point, I heard that there was this attacker called Mixter, somewhere in Germany, who had created this tool suite TFN Tribal Flood Network, which was
it.
used to, have massive DDoS attacks on Yahoo and a couple of websites.
Okay.
And back in those days, Yahoo was super important and powerful, right? Like Google
Right.
wasn't.
Of course.
And when that happened, got me very curious. I was like, okay, how is it possible that a tool, a
Hmm.
simple program could bring down the internet in such a big way?
Hmm.
So did some searching, finally found the tool, downloaded it, opened the zip archive, or rather probably like tar file back in the day.
Yeah.
And the moment I looked at it, I was like, hey, this is all like jumbled up in some programming language, wasn't
Right.
making any sense. Quickly figured out that it was C code, and that is really when I started getting very curious. So this was just the year before. I think I was in grade 12 by then.
Hmm.
And I was just preparing for, back in those days, I think there was IITs and a couple of other universities maybe. Isn't the way it is today, right? Like, I don't know, India now has what, like 25,000 universities,
Yes. Yes.
uh, probably more. So when I was preparing, I was like, okay, this is interesting. I had some spare time, started teaching myself. Then when I went into the university, At that point in time, I think, imagine our whole batch in IIT was just 60, 70 people, I think, no, 120 people. And
Right.
out of which only 10 folks had ever seen a computer. Think about it.
Yeah.
Engineering
Yeah.
first year, right?
Hmm.
So I wanted to keep my lead on because I felt like the moment I entered the computer center, at least I knew where the power switch was. And it was
Yes.
really that bad.
Yeah.
So
I think
very
it's still to an extent not very great, but for sure it's
yeah.
getting there.
Yeah. So that's really where, I quickly figured like, okay, this was interesting. I had gotten into electronics and communications.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, I mean, you have those whole rank systems and everything. And very soon, what I figured was like I started enjoying computers a lot more, teaching myself programming a lot, then networking and all of that stuff. And I started writing my own like little programs, first started with very simple server client and all that. And
Hmm.
then the enthusiastic part really was that, at that point, even in IIT, you had a very slow internet bandwidth connection, which you had to share with everybody in the damn hostel.
Right.
And I quickly figured like these switches were running spanning tree protocol, STP. And I started reading about it and figured like I could basically reconfigure the route of the whole STP
Hmm.
network of switches. So I could actually block out a large part of the hostel so that, only a few rooms and few switch ports would end up getting most of the internet
Uh,
connectivity.
okay.
So started off with small pranks like this. At that point, these were all like barely managed switches. There was hardly any logging system. So
Right.
most of the time, I think people just figured there was some network congestion, something else going on.
Yeah.
Fast forward, uh, I think I was probably in the third year. And at that point, everybody used to apply for foreign internships because that was like the in thing
Hmm.
at that point. So I applied bunch of places, finally got through this university in Switzerland called Hochschule for Technik Rapperswil. And they had this very interesting project on Wi-Fi security from Zurich
Hmm.
Railways.
Okay.
So, till then I'd never seen a Wi-Fi access point, none of that stuff.
Hmm.
And the project really was very interesting is, they had these rails which were kind of going and they had access points along the railway system. And there was really no handoff protocol. So imagine that if you authenticated to the first access point, by the time you could type something, you're probably on to the second or the third AP when you're in a
Correct.
train.
Correct.
And the handoff protocol actually, given that Wi-Fi itself was nascent, had issues when the train was very fast moving because of Doppler effect. I don't know if you remember any of the physics, but
Bit of it.
okay, when you kind of like move, there's the
Yes.
the
Yes. Yeah.
frequency of the wave kind of like changes based upon the speed of the observer, or rather the
Correct. Correct.
speed
Correct.
of whoever is there in front of the observer, right?
Hmm.
So that was the time when I was writing a lot of code, pretty low level, where packet sniffers, injectors, and all of that
Hmm.
from a Wi-Fi perspective. Did that project, went really well. I was presented a laptop. Imagine like coming back with a laptop. Nobody had
Correct.
again seen a laptop at that
Haha.
point in the batch. Uh, and then I guess that was a turning point for me where I really felt like I was actually good at this, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and I somehow managed my final year project to be in cybersecurity. Finding vulnerabilities in the TCP/IP protocol suite. Wrote a lot of code. Created my own little network worms and whatnot, and demonstrated all of that in my final year BTech project.
Hmm.
And post that, yeah, I mean, life just kind of like carried me. I mean, I joined a couple of companies where I wasn't. Uh, Quickly figured like I didn't enjoy programming much. I was used to work for Cisco systems, did a lot of their layer 2 port security and all of that 802.1x programming. But then
Hmm.
quickly, I just felt like I enjoyed the breaking part more. And
Hmm.
that's how slowly it kind of transitioned, where I joined Airtight Networks in Pune. This was way back in 2007, like 16, 17 years back.
Hmm.
And that's when they had me work on a protocol called web cloaking, and they wanted me to break it. That led to, me finding eventually the cafe
That
latte
led to
attack and
everything
what,
kind of happening,
yeah,
everything one
scope
after
would
the
have gone and things just moved on. Yeah.
other. Vivek, it's very interesting that you have not had a structured entry into cybersecurity, correct? And yet,
Hmm.
kind of here and there, you've gone through the whole thing and done it. This really proves the point that there is really no correct way to get into cybersecurity for many people.
Yeah.
Some people argue bug bounty karo, and then some people say do this, do that. Um, but yeah, you started by just figuring random things out, doing some random pranks, reverse engineering some, malware online, and that on its own piqued your interest. And I think there are many others who have entered the space in that way and really passionate about it from that end, right?
Yeah.
So that is really great to hear, Vivek. Moving on to my next question. So we were earlier discussing about Anand exiting PingSafe, right? And of course, you've also exited INE to Pentest Academy to INE, right? So you were a security engineer before. You had hands-on, coding and so on experience, but then you decided to build your own product, correct? So what I would love to understand, what is your take on security engineers pursuing entrepreneurship, right? Building products of their own that can be, used globally, which is, something that you've done on your own and of course have been very successful in. And
Yeah.
for yourself, right? Maybe that can be a second part. How did it click for you that you wanted to start, Pentester Academy and then of course now SquareX? If you can talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was really very accidental in the sense that remember that back in the day when I just started the very first company, and actually, by the way, we used to create wireless monitoring devices and sell it, and the U.S. Department
Mhm.
of Defense was one of our customers, alongside with doing a lot of the education stuff. So we were doing a bunch of things. But really, if you kind of go back 2009, 2010, that time frame, there was really no cybersecurity research or anything going around anywhere in India, right?
Okay.
Uh, Bug Bounty had not appeared. I don't even know if HackerOne and these guys had even been
These guys
founded.
are 2013 onwards. Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
nothing like that really existed. So my entire motivation was I really wanted to go do security research, break things, and present it in the top conferences in the world, right?
Okay.
So kind of enjoyed that very first DEF CON main stage, felt like, okay, I could compete at a world level and all of that. And that's really where my thought process was like, hey, till the time I'm like probably working in a regular job, this isn't going to be something I'm going to do apart from very rare occurrences where, somebody at work says, oh, this is something important, maybe you should try it out. So what I felt was the exchange rate worked well. And I said, okay, why don't I just go about doing research and just putting out my videos and everything, on securitytube.net. Had no real plan for anything. And then I felt, okay, maybe in these conferences, I could go teach a couple of classes. And, for example, if you teach a black hat class with 200 people, that to me was more than sufficient to sustain myself for a year back in the day.
Got it.
So it really started, with the need for me to get more free time so that I could
Mhm.
focus on something I wanted to do. And then, see if how I could kind of fill up and make sure that my bills are paid, right? Uh, Fast forward, I think once that started happening, I quickly figured like, okay, there was some real business to be built. There was a lot of inbound traction where, I mean, I never had a full-time salesperson, you won't believe, till the time I exited to INE.
Oh, okay. You were
The,
selling on your own.
yeah, never. Yeah, I mean, like, no, I wasn't doing any sales.
Okay.
Everything was inbound.
Oh, inbound, purely
Uh,
inbound. That's
yeah,
very interesting.
purely inbound. Like we had Fortune 500 customers, the US Defense, Air Force, everything inbound.
Mhm.
People used to fill up the enterprise form and just say we want to buy, right? Like we
Okay.
uh, just probably like 3 4 months before acquisition was when really we said, okay, let's think about this a little bit more structured. Let's maybe at least have an inside salesperson who's reaching out to people who are sending all of this. So I think that taught me something, which is if you build a really good product and if you start putting out to the community early on, take feedback, build with the community, I think you kind of belong, kind of with the
Mhm.
community, right? So that way, what always has happened is people look at it and say, ah, okay, Vivek created this, I should definitely try it out. And when they try it out,
Mhm.
that's the only one opportunity you get, right? And, whether it's a course that I may have built or a wireless monitoring product or what I'm doing with SquareX. And then at that point, you really have to live up to your reputation, right? People feel like, okay, Vivek put this out. This is interesting. This is nice. I probably need to follow this. So I've
Mhm.
been a firm believer, like build great products. Uh, and probably the traction will slowly start coming if you kind of do it right. Of course, you do have to seed things. I'm absolutely shameless when it comes to promoting things online. As you kind of mentioned before we started, even the most
Yes.
smallest of feature,
Mhm.
I will record a video, put it out, and I mean, you kind of owe it to yourself and your team and the company and your investors and entrepreneur to kind of, do as much.
So Vivek,
Uh,
would you say that in cybersecurity sales, right? And this could be very interesting to some of the founders who watch this podcast.
yeah.
Is it or growing a cybersecurity company in general? Is it more about sales or is it more about product?
I think for a very long time, at least the first few years, it's going to largely be about the product, right? Eventually, I think once you get to a certain size and scale or above a certain revenue, it will also have to be about sales.
Hmm.
Uh, and the reason I say is what tends to happen is in the early days, if you have a good following, just kind of hitting your following and seeing if they want to convert to customers, itself can keep you occupied, right? And honestly, like people
Hmm.
who know you, even if they don't want to buy, there's something definitely wrong with your product.
Correct.
Uh, Eventually, what will happen is you'll kind of see that you've exhausted all of these organic avenues.
Hmm.
And that is the time when you probably want to kind of like really start pushing it. Now, of course, every product is different, right? A very heavy B2B product might require, you to kind of go start selling, start talking to people and all of that. So there's no kind of like one silver bullet, which will kind of solve everything. My own personal view has always been like build a great product, spend a lot more time on it initially, learn from your customers, take that feedback and then progressively start to build. So yeah, to me, the first 1 to 2 years is more of product.
Makes sense, Vivek. I think you know, in cybersecurity, if you don't have a good product, you can't sell. So having a basic good product with a good following and initial people who said that this is good is extremely important. And then once that kind of happens, that can scale as well. So I deeply connect with that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Um, so I'll move on to my next question, Vivek, which is about your comic, which is also something I find super interesting. I go on LinkedIn and then I see that okay, Vivek is giving out these comics at this conference, and massive thing is going on, and then all the bug bounty hunters who are participating in SquareX program are getting another comic and so on, along with of course the prizes and everything, right? So very curious to understand what was the motivation behind the comic. Were you like a art, very interested in art? Are you drawing the comics on your own? And
Mhm.
you know how is it that you think the comic is kind of helping the world, or is it just for fun, really?
Yeah. So I think, at least when I was young, we all went through a phase where we've read comics, right?
Hmm.
When I look at my kids now, I think most of the content is really on digital mediums like iPads and everything. I don't know how relevant comics will be when they grow up, but
Hmm.
so I think something which I always liked. The second thing I also know is like, hackers, cybersecurity folks. Deep down inside, we look at ourselves as vigilantes and superheroes in our own right, right? In
To
in, in
extent,
some
sure, yes.
in
Yeah.
in some way, we do have that.
The
Uh,
world perceives us in that way.
Yeah, and truth
Yeah,
be told, many of us would love to be perceived that way as well, right?
for
Like,
sure, yes.
we are doing nothing to extinguish, that flame. Rather, we are probably like, blowing on it just to feel like, okay, and that is a nice thing, right? Like to feel empowered, to feel like powerful in whatever way. Anyway, so what had happened is that I had basically asked my son, my elder son, and I told him, he was asking me, hey, dad, what do you do? Right.
Hmm.
And I said, okay, why don't you just go Google, figure out what,
Yeah, that's
who
what
dad
everyone
is.
says, right? Stack Overflow answer. Go Google
Yeah.
that.
So I said, just go Google. So he came back to me, then he said, like, and there was some article where somebody had said, oh, top hackers in India, something like that. And, my
Hmm.
name was there. And he came back with like, oh, you're a hacker, you steal from people.
Okay.
And then I quickly figured, like, the mainstream narrative of hackers and hacking had been like very negative, right? Like most of the time it'd be like, oh, hackers stole this, hackers did that, whatever. So I felt like I wanted to kind of right a wrong over there and give a more realistic narrative. Also, what do you refer young folks to? You'll refer them to the Matrix.
Hmm.
Like Neo wasn't a real hacker, right? He waved his hand
Of
and it
course.
parted ways, right? Like, or Swordfish or any of those other movies, right?
Yeah,
Very, very
hacking into the
few.
mainframe.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's really where, I felt like, okay, I'd exited from INE. I had a bit of time. I wasn't really wanting to jump into another company yet. And I told myself, okay, I said, look, I've never dabbled with the creative side of things, been a very technical terminal guy all the time.
Hmm.
So I said, okay, why not think about a hacker vigilante story, make it hyper realistic? Also, at least in the first few issues, have an Indian hacker hero. And the big motivation behind that is and this is just my personal feeling, is I felt like Indian hackers, cybersecurity researchers are now disproportionately contributing to securing or harming or whatever the world.
100%. Yes.
Unfortunately, I don't feel that we've been given due credit from a global
Mm-hmm.
recognition perspective, right? When it comes to like platforms where names are taken, I've always felt like, at least personally, I've kind of felt like, things haven't been very fair.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt rather than put up at least the first few, series where you once again have, a hacker from a Western country, why not like go ahead and marry, the hacker with Indian culture, how we think and all of that, but make it hyper realistic so the hacks are depicted very, very correctly. So if somebody's just interested, they can pick it up and still feel like, oh wow, is this what firmware hacking is? Let me go and do a Google search and get more excited. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that was the motivation. I absolutely cannot draw. I tried. Uh,
Okay. All right.
what I've done for the comic is I wrote the entire story. I've done the entire storyboarding, which is really,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of drawing out the scenes in
Correct.
a ball stick manner. And then after that, I've written all the dialogues. And what I did was I hired a full team, of folks who would like draw and color and, do basically the lettering and whatnot. And that team ended up creating the entire series. Actually, we are now, funny enough, we've done six. I'm going to release two onwards, probably like next month. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody's only seeing the first issue, but six issues are actually done in the background.
Oh, okay. So 6 issues are upcoming, basically.
Yeah,
That is
five more.
amazing.
Yeah,
That is amazing.
yeah,
Well, that's awesome, Vivek. I think your point regarding Indian security researchers and then contribution. I think personally, I connect to that very much because I face that on a daily, right? That
yeah,
of course we have the Indian security researchers and we want to show them on a global platform. And the first point that you said as well with regards to uh, you know that perception of hackers being a bit bad. Still late, some in some old age companies in India, I do see the question when they ask, say, okay, I tell them why should you run a bug bounty? I say them, okay, you get these people come in and they will test it out. The
yeah,
next thing they say, what if they do something bad? And that kind of thing in the head, it really needs to be clarified.
yeah.
That okay, you have to invite good security researchers to do the testing and so on. So that's really great stuff that you're doing, and I really hope it's very successful. And I
Yeah.
would really love to one day read the comic as well, and maybe the other 5 issues also. So do mail it over to me if possible.
Yeah, 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 of course. I'll have Jonas send it over.
Done, done, done. So, Vivek, my next question is, more around SquareX, right? Would love to understand, when the world is working in the, B2B security space,
Yeah.
why do you opt for the consumer security kind of perspective, right? Because as
Hmm.
we've discussed a lot, right, that antivirus has always been something that's been around. Beyond that, for consumers, a secure browsing environment and so on, these things have never been around. Maybe not been important enough to be worked on. Maybe people don't consider it to be a large enough market. What is that particular insight that you had on this topic of securing a consumer, or is there a story around it that you decided to start SquareX, and and yeah, what is the overall goal with it?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, eventually we'll serve consumers as well as enterprise. Similar to LastPass, OnePass, which
Hmm.
have a both prosumer as well as an enterprise one. Uh, Now, honestly, here's what I've seen, right? Like most regular people hate security products.
Right.
And and the big reason is, they get in the way of work. They get in the way of productivity. Somebody sends you a file, you try to open it, your antivirus jumps out and basically says, oh, possible malware. And now you can't
Hmm.
read the file, you can't do anything. So the average Joe is probably going to disable the AV because imagine like, he's applied for 100 jobs. Someone replies with a, job offer and now he's not
Hmm.
able to open it, right?
Of course.
And I think, this has been the fundamental reason why I feel like, unfortunately, people hate installing security products. They view it more as an insurance rather than
Hmm.
something which is a productivity multiplier in any way.
Hmm.
At the very same time, I think once you lose the whole like, hey, I should never get in the way of productivity objective, I feel like you aren't really doing justice to the end user. Now,
Hmm.
same is in the enterprise as well, by the way. In the enterprise, when people use security products, installed on their endpoints,
Hmm.
you see the same problem that sites are blocked, and now maybe the user wants to do research about that website. Now
Hmm.
he has to go through a whole new IT case where he's requesting for the site to be unblocked just for him or for his whole team. somebody from IT has to look at it, blah, 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 the whole nine yards,
Correct.
right? Uh, at the very same time, if you kind of look at it today on your endpoint, which is, whether it's laptops or mobile devices, but let's say focusing on laptops, endpoint security is basically just process and file security, right?
Mhm.
It absolutely has no application context awareness.
Correct. It
So
does not.
yeah, so it's a
Yes.
very simple example. Let's say you're opened your browser, have both your company account as well as your personal email open, and now
Mhm.
you download a file probably from your company account,
Mhm.
and the file is malicious. Now at that point, your AV or CrowdStrike or whatever will scream. It'll have no context of where the file was downloaded. It'll just say the browser
That file is
you
gone. Yeah.
used to download, and that's it, right?
Correct. Correct.
So there were many, many such shortcomings. I'll give you another example. Let's say when it comes to web browsing security,
Mhm.
secure web gateways and zero trust network access and all of that,
Mhm.
these technologies were invented some 10, 12 years back when
Mhm.
web apps were not as complex, right? So now imagine that, you visit a website regularly and you've given it clipboard permission.
Mhm.
And now maybe you just copied your credit card on a clipboard, and that very day, an attacker managed to go ahead and kind of embed malicious code onto the same website. So which ends up reading the clipboard, sending it out. Now a secure web gateway, unfortunately, has no context of what happened in your web browser, what really the user is interacting, how did finally any data get sent, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, I could go on and on, but really, in a nutshell, what I realized when I was running Pentester and we were helping a lot of red teams break existing security solutions
Mhm.
is today, when it comes to endpoint security, it's basically process and file,
Correct.
or you try to do things in the cloud with proxies and secure
EDR
web
and so on. Yeah.
gateways. Yeah. Now, when it came to enterprise browsers, a couple of companies were primarily like Island and Talon were only looking at access control, which
Correct.
is how do you access your internal websites and SaaS websites in a secure way. Our outlook is a little bit different, right? I basically say
Mhm.
every threat that any user could get attacked in the browser falls into one of four buckets: malicious websites, malicious files, malicious content, and malicious network. And
Okay.
so the
Yeah.
whole thought process really was, could you detect and deter all of these attacks sitting right there in the browser? Could you
Mhm.
run lightweight machine learning models in the browser itself to go ahead and detect these? Now, the whole industry has been doing a lot of things on the server side, and some things do have value when you do it on the server side. But we figured like the tailwinds are, endpoint systems are more powerful. Browser is a massively powerful computing platform. Using this, how much can you really offload as close to the attack as possible? So, bunch of different insights, over the years, kind of culminated to SquareX, which is really, the final avatar you guys are going to see probably in Q1 is a
Mhm.
browser native security solution, which basically can detect, malicious websites, files, and all of that, but completely in the browser with very little requirement for things to be synced with the cloud, unless, of course, an enterprise
But
wants.
do you think Vivek SquareX will eventually evolve into a browser itself? Like, will it just be a Chromium-based browser on its own?
It's a good question. I think for a long time, it's going to remain as a browser extension, along
Mhm.
with maybe an endpoint security agent. And the reason I say that
Uh,
is for people to migrate to a new browser is a very, very high bar, right? You can
that is true.
force it in enterprises. Look at Brave. Brave is so good,
Brave has managed to do it very well, though.
but Brave only has 40 million users the last time I checked.
No, for sure. But they've managed to kind of take a level of
100%.
people coming in. Yes,
But
yes.
if you really want your product to be ubiquitous pretty much, in the
I
whole
see. To
world,
that scale.
internet. Yeah. So that's really where we kind of were forced to start as a browser extension, because we were like,
Mhm.
okay, this is easy, super easy to install. There's no nuances of, the operating system, the version, what other things are running and whatnot. And it's easy to extend it to eventually have a local agent which can actually
Mhm.
talk to the extension. But that was the whole rationale behind being extension first. One day, if we are large enough, one could possibly explore also being a dedicated browser. Right now, we don't have plans.
Understood. No, that's very interesting. And your point with regards to a local agent is also very interesting. I mean, it seems a bit counterintuitive,
Hmm.
but would love to see how exactly it turns out. Actually, having a local model running on the browser itself. Because always I've seen, and personally with regards to not just cybersecurity, running a model locally is dependent on the user's machine's performance,
100%.
and then
Yeah.
the user's machine performance maybe on a desktop it could be high, right? But some people use an old age Android phone as well, right? And then that kind of goes down. So that was always a problem. So if you folks are able to come up with a solution on that, that I think would be really, really great to see.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of nuances, and that's really where a lot of the innovation the company has been doing. We are just about to file a bunch of patents around, many of these fundamental shifts that we are
Mhm.
bringing in and all of that. So I guess
Mhm.
what you see out right now is an isolation product, and that was just the tip of the iceberg because what I really wanted was, iterative building.
Mhm.
So while we are building the heavy duty features and progressively rolling them, I really wanted like the whole world to bash the product, see if it is, from a usability perspective, easy, good,
Mhm.
bad. What are people using it for? What use cases? And it's been pretty good. I think the last time we met when we were in the US was November, was it? Or October? I forget.
Yes, I think it was October. October.
October. And now in
Yes.
just and that time we just had like 10,000 users.
Mhm.
Now, in just 3 months, now we have a total of 60,000, sixty-five
Oh,
thousand
amazing.
users,
Very, very
out
good
of
growth.
which, yeah, 40,000 of them use the Chrome extension and around
Mhm.
25,000 use the web app, which is a little bit limited, but hey, I think, whoever's happy with whatever they want. So,
Correct. To each their
yeah.
own. Understood, Vivek. No, that's really amazing. Uh, One random question. Where exactly did the name SquareX come from? What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think when I was thinking about the company name, the whole thought process was, how do you kind of like rationalize all of this? So that's really where,
Mhm.
so square is a very fundamental geometric figure.
Mhm.
And if you think about it, it's like a symbol of stability, right? Like on with a square, once you go 3 dimensions, you can have a brick, you can do this, you can build stuff. At the very same time, a square is also like a closed perimeter, right? Which
Right.
is encompasses whatever is inside.
Okay.
And X is basically the universe, or in algebra, X is unknown, right?
Okay.
Think of X as the universe of unknown threats out there.
Mhm.
So
Okay. And then
SquareX is,
within a thread,
yeah,
within
yeah.
the perimeter.
Yeah, so SquareX is
Understood.
a company, who's kind of ambitious enough to go behind this whole universe of unknown threats,
Mhm.
but trying to kind of ground it in a lot of kind of like stable security product and kind of like knowledge on top of which it is kind of trying to build and kind of encompass the X.
Understood. That's very interesting, Vivek. I mean, that's we didn't expect that answer, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I
Vivek, my
think
final question. Yeah, you go on,
Yeah,
please.
I think most
Yeah.
folks who hear SquareX first must just think like, oh, this is just a kind of like cheap clone of SpaceX. But yeah,
Or ex Twitter,
yeah, for
right?
that
Or
matter, yeah.
yes, so that's there, but very interesting. So Vivek, moving on to my final question.
Yeah,
Um, and then we love to keep these podcasts short and crisp so that everybody can go through them in a quick time
absolutely.
span.
Yeah,
Um, you've taught cybersecurity for a very long time, right? And you understand it from a very fundamental perspective, and you on your own have been very passionate about the space and so on. Many listeners of this podcast are themselves security engineers or often people who are very intrigued by cybersecurity because of interesting things that you're doing, or Anand getting that exit. So many people are looking at it now, and so on. So cybersecurity is a very interesting space for everyone. So I think one thing that all the users have requested me, whoever told me that you're coming on the podcast, so I should ask you is, what would be your advice to them to get into cybersecurity
yeah,
and pursue it? Because as we discussed at the start, everyone does have a different path. What worked for you back then may not work for someone right now, and yeah, would love to understand what are your thoughts on it, and then as a follow-on question, if any of the users, anyone would like to eventually work with you at SquareX, right, or be a security engineer or contribute to the product in any way, what are the top things that you will look for from them,
yeah.
if you can
No,
answer
it's a good question, right? And
that?
I always say that in any field, like cybersecurity, no exception, there are three ways to look at entering a field. One is survive, the second is thrive, and the third is excel, right?
Mhm.
Cybersecurity is a bit more challenging simply because it's a second order function, right? There's any new technology, there's a cybersecurity component to it.
Mhm.
So, of course, which means you have to learn continuously.
Mhm.
Uh, I would kind of recommend that if you're someone who wants to excel, at cybersecurity, or for that matter, anything, then you genuinely need to be obsessed about this field. Like, do you obsessively think about cybersecurity problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you obsessively think about, like, okay, is there a better way to kind of pen test, break in, do the bug bounty? Uh, so I think in cybersecurity, the only folks I've seen really, really excel is folks who have a very solid research mindset,
Mm-hmm.
uh, right? Which is, you are actively trying to find new ways to do things. You aren't really collecting, the knowledge of others and just trying to kind of replicate that at bleeding edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the excel part. If you want to thrive, hey, you can absolutely go ahead, read blog posts of every single bug bounty hunter, what he's found. You can read blog posts of folks who are finding new research. Make sure that your tools, your processes, or whatever you're running is at the bleeding edge, and you can very well thrive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to survive, it's really, folks who might just do an Nmap Metasploit class, and probably think that, hey, now we could probably start like pen testing something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, okay, yeah. So my advice basically would be that get in if you want to, at the very least, thrive or excel.
Mm-hmm.
Cybersecurity is a field, I think, folks, if you're going in just to get a job, if you feel it's lucrative, I've never seen it work. Generally, you're kind of left behind very soon because you just don't have the learning mentality, you just don't have the research mentality. And that's my advice overall for cybersecurity. What was the second question again? You said there's something
The second
connected.
question was, if you were to hire someone today
Oh,
and
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
wanted to join you for SquareX, what are the top things that you will look for in
Yeah,
them?
yeah, yeah. So almost every person I like to hire, at least on the tech side, I like to look at some anomalies,
Okay.
in whatever they have done, whether they're a student. So, people ask me, do I look for grades? As like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you come to me and you basically say, I have zero projects, I have absolutely nothing on GitHub, I have never found an interesting vulnerability, then of course the only final question I can ask you is, at the very least, do you have good grades?
Yeah, I
Right?
guess. Okay.
Because because you did nothing else, which basically means at the very least, I hope you studied what you were supposed to study, right?
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, my first question is, for folks who are probably 2 to 3 years experience, what I typically do is I say, pick the topic you think you're great at,
Mm-hmm.
and let's just talk about that. So I
Okay.
really want to know, because once you tell me that this is the topic I am really passionate about, I really like, in that, if I can punch holes, if that I can kind of prove to you that you do not have good understanding, that clearly shows me, I mean, the topic you feel you're great at, you're actually bad at.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, how the rest would look like.
Mm-hmm.
So literally my first interview generally is just that. I think if someone does manage to clear that round, then the next one is, okay, you said you're absolutely great at this. Show me some outlier data points, show me a
Yeah.
great blog post that you've written, which probably everybody's referencing, a bug that you may have found, which really required a lot of intricate thinking or chaining of multiple attacks, things like that. And if it's for a programming position, most of the time I'll probably give you a very esoteric kind of programming challenge, which has nothing to do
Okay.
with algorithms and all of that. Mostly it'll have to do with you programming something finally, which ends up breaking into something. Uh, and if you're able to do it, then I know that you can think out of the box. So I generally try to triage for thinking out of the box, super, super passionate, where you almost obsessively think about at least one field, one few problem sets and whatnot. Because I've seen, like, generally folks who do this, the rest just falls in place, right?
Yeah, Vivek, I think that makes a lot of sense. Your first challenge is exactly what we do as well in our interviews for, BugBase and so on. Just pick a random thing that they're saying, they will say some,
Yeah.
random thing, and then you ask them a question about it. And if they're not able to describe what an API is, you know that this is not worth spending time on, right? So I think one of the most important things that you said is, being real and being honest with what you know and being genuine about it, right? I think if a person starts with that, that is very solid. The second thing which you've said is having a community presence, having a name in the overall community, which I think we've both established that has been extremely important in the cybersecurity space, for either building or growing your overall product. And your whole points on survive, thrive, and excel, I think connect with many people here. I think those who are surviving really need to look back and think whether they're really interested in the cybersecurity space, and of course the ones that are excelling. I have personally seen what you're saying is very valid. That they have that obsession that cybersecurity is so fascinating and interesting to them that they go into it, learn whatever they can, spend hours and hours, don't do anything else, and they are the ones that are able to kind of take that space on. So, concluding on that note, thank you so much, Vivek, for joining us on this podcast. It was a pleasure having you, and thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much. Yeah, it was an incredible discussion. And yeah, rooting for you from the outside, and all the best to you and the rest of the team as well.
Thank you so much.